2024 Foxtrot O2 Golf, maybe 1600. So what you're about to see is, so if this is your first time, my dad's been slowing me down a great deal with my work. In fact, I realized as I gave this presentation, that's what you're about to see.
That is going to determine what happens next. And the computations that lead to
Let me know when you're ready for something to eat.
there does not seem to be any need
Did you start that or didn't we?
for something like a mind. That discussion. There's no real need for life, for that matter. If the circuits just work on physical principles, then who cares what the patterns of activity mean?
What?
Why does it matter what the mental content associated with a particular pattern of neural activity is, if it is solely the physical configuration of the circuitry that is going to determine what happens next?
What is he talking
They
about?
have set out as neuroscientists to explain how the workings of the brain generate or realize psychological phenomena. But we're in danger of explaining those phenomena away.
Oh my goodness.
It's all just physics at the end of the day. If the neuroscientists have it bad, pity the poor physicists, whose existential angst must run much deeper. Where neuroscientists can at least hold on to the view that the circuits in the brain are doing things, whether you are or not. Some physicists claim that even that functionality is an illusion.
Yeah.
After all, the brain is made of molecules and atoms that must
Yeah.
obey the laws of physics.
Yeah,
Just like
Dad.
the molecules and atoms in any other bit of matter.
Yeah. You're not special.
Small bits of matter are pushed and pulled by all the forces acting on them.
Yes.
Gravity, electromagnetism, the so-called strong and weak.
Remember those forces you taught me about when I was a kid?
And where each atom goes is fully determined by the way those interactions play out.
You know, maybe for you, understanding the rainbow or the rose, it takes something away. Not for me. Not for me, buddy. Not for me, buddy.
You have to listen to different points of view. Well, I'm saying I'm listening to different points of various ways of.
You haven't listened to this point of view. You haven't.
Write it up, write a paper up so I can understand it on paper.
If you can listen to this guy's audio, you can listen to me explain it to you.
It's not the same.
Why not?
Because I can read that. I've got the book too.
Yeah, but you can listen to it as well.
Yeah, I'm one of the somebody knows.
Huh?
Yeah,
Well, you can take notes while I'm talking to you.
I'm going to cook some dinner.
Obviously, these reasons aren't real. There's some other reason that you want to talk about the value of listening to other points of view, but haven't even listened to the ones that I've been talking about.
I have listened to you.
You haven't. Well, then what's it theory?
I don't understand it.
Well, you would understand it if I explained it to
Okay,
you.
we'll sit and we'll do it now then, right?
Okay, let's do it now then.
I'll just sit down here.
All right, let's do it now then. I'll be right back. Okay. 2024 Fober O2 Goldie. What's the time? You have your phone on you?
No.
15:30.
European Central Time.
Central European summertime. Okay. Okay. Now, here's the rule. You do want to hear about perspectives in psychology?
Yes.
Okay, so you're going to be listening then.
I'll listen.
And
This is a lecture. Yes.
This is a lecture. I'm taking questions, but I won't take any students who come in up and saying, "Oh no, professor, that's wrong."
Okay.
Okay? All right. Do you want need paper and pen?
No. I want to just take it.
I'll just take it in.
Because you have a video of it. Can't you put that up on the TV? Is it the TV or not?
Yeah, I want to.
Why not?
So I don't want to scratch the TV. Let's see what the size is like. That's right against the screen. I'll put a little sheet over the TV. How's that? Okay. You gotta let me get into it. Okay, you have to let me do that once. You got to let me get into it. All right. There are certain fundamentals you're not going to like. You just have to believe me, or not permanently, but to be able to listen to it. Okay. Okay. And thank you for that verbal feedback. I appreciate that, and try to keep that up. Okay. I'm getting into it. I'm investing in this moment now. Okay. So don't shoot it down too quickly, or at all. Okay. Okay. So we have a little soma. We have dendrites. Axon. Okay. That's the element of you. Well, not really. The element of you. This is basically the element of you. Okay, it's the arrangement, okay, and activity, so the chemical availability and stuff here, and the arrangement of these. Okay? So very simply, you have an input from outside. Okay? This can only be triggered by that input if it's a specific input. Okay? There's another guy who can be triggered by something slightly different. Okay? Input, output, behavior, speech, whatever. Okay? That's it. All right? So that's what the brain is. Bunch of neurons, boop, 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 boop. And you can have different sort of networks, okay? Series of neurons connected. These networks are going to interact, etc. Okay? It's all or nothing. You understand? Now, so this has a certain threshold for it's going to fire, okay? If it gets a yes from here, and from here, your spatial summation, that's going to be enough for it to fire. If it gets yes, 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 all from here, temporal summation, that's going to be enough to get it over the threshold within a short period of time. And it's going to fire. Either it fires or it doesn't. All or nothing, okay? All or nothing. All right. Good. Now, the arrangement of these and the chemical alimentation of them was determined by evolution, okay? People who were adapted, organisms that were adapted to their surroundings, because of their network, they survived. So that network stuck around. Okay. So you went very simply. You went from you had some. Let's start with atoms. These atoms started bonding to form molecules. Molecules started bonding to form these protein things. Okay. Proteins and other things, they're interacting. Okay. To the point where you've got plants. Okay. That are able to respond to stimuli. So you've got the sunlight. Sunlight is being processed by a network, I don't call them neurons, but by a network of interacting biological pieces. And the plant goes, oh, hey, sunlight's over there. Let me get some sunlight. Okay? Does not make that choice. Okay? That choice just happens. Okay? And then you get the animal kingdom. Okay? Now, once you got an animal, you start to centralize some of the processing mechanisms as far as external stimuli. Not all of them. You have reflexes. You have other things. You have your skin reacts to touch, whatever. But a lot of things start getting centralized in what we call the brain. Okay, so most the processing mechanisms, the choices and stuff, are in the brain. Okay. Now, when we accept that, a Warsaw, and then all right, do this. Okay, now we're going to do a brief overview of the mind, given what we've talked about the biology. Very brief. And then we're going to talk about some of the implications of this biology stuff that we talked about. We're going to cover the Warsaw illusions. Okay. By the way, we're not going to be presenting a lot of evidence. I mean, so far, pretty much you'll accept all that stuff. And then I think if we need to get to evidence, then we will. Okay, but I think what I'd like to do is, let's do a brief overview. Okay, so stimulus, response, right? Something triggers this, and there's a response, okay? Now the response of the whole person is distributed across all of this stuff, okay? So it's not like a single neuron says, hey, we should run, understand? Keep up that verbal feedback, yeah? You're with me? Okay. So in, out. Okay, now in logic, or in philosophy, or in argumentation, we'll typically construct an argument like this. Okay? 1, 2, 3. So we'll say x is true. We'll say that if x is true, then y must be true. Well, look, because x was true, then we'll have like our conclusion y is true. Okay. So what's important there is that if-then operation. Okay? In the case that, then I can affirm this. Okay? For this condition, then I respond this way. Okay? If I get activity here like this, then I activate this guy and this guy, or I vote to activate that guy and that guy anyway. Okay? So all of that, it all comes down to the same thing. Input, output, all that stuff, you can say if then. The condition, the action. Okay? Or the consequence. All right, if then. Okay? Now, the system, well, is the total system of ifs as they're arranged. Okay, how you doing?
Good.
Good? Okay. 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 So, okay. So, how do I put this? Okay. Let me give you an example of some its for a moment, okay? So you can imagine what's being mapped out in the system, connectome, okay? All right, so if person is beautiful, then person is moral. This is an example of a family called the halo effect, which has been observed in experimentation, where if we have a good first impression of someone or we see one trait in particular that's good right off the bat, we generally tend to assume that the other traits are good as well. Okay? So if the person is beautiful, or if the person has one positive trait, then the person has positive traits, would be sort of the generalized form of that. Okay? Another one. If person is different than person outgroup. Okay. The outgroup bias is you can maybe say well, it's a number of different its. That's one first to establish that it's the outgroup. If outgroup, then be vigilant. Okay, if be vigilant, then afford attention to odd behavior. Okay, so that's like part of the sequence of in-group, out-group, of the out-group anyway. And then we can imagine next is in the brain as a network for, okay, hey, I'm supposed to pay attention to odd behavior. There's also, of course, the malenting it, which is going to be in there, which is part of the out-group, which is to, if I see odd behavior, then presume bad intentions kind of thing. Okay? So, what we just talked about are the halo effect and the outgroup bias. Okay? And so what you'll notice is that whether it's called an effect or a bias or the recency illusion, which is if an example from recent memory comes to mind, then this is a commonly occurring thing. Or then this deserves attention. If it's recent, then it deserves attention. Okay? So whether you call it a bias, heuristic, an illusion, an effect, whatever you like to call it, what you have here is an it that is not adaptive to the given situation. That's why we're calling it a bias. It does not get us good results here. Okay? So, any bias, fallacy, illusion, heuristic, effect, sunk cost fallacy, if I have invested, then it is worth investing in, continuing to invest in. Okay? So all of those, and you know French, mal, bad, those are mallets. Okay? Now, evolution basically chose the its that were successful in our processing. Okay? Not every it is a mallet, otherwise everything would be on fire. Obviously, we have other its that are better adapted to the given situation. By the way you evaluate whether something is mallet or bonnet, it's never in general. It's always, in this situation, is it appropriate? Clearly, the situation has activated it, but is it appropriate to the situation? Is its result appropriate to the situation? If not, it's a mallet. If it is, then it's a bonnet. Okay? Now, reason did not evolve. What evolved are these shortcuts. If this, then that. And it's an imitation of reason. And we can see with every mallet how it could be useful. So even with if they have a positive quality, because the brain is trying to be as economic, as energy efficient as possible, it tries to quickly group people and categorize people, right? And so it really doesn't matter how you got into the good group. It's just trying to go, okay, good, bad. Saves energy. You got some people that you're going to look out for. You got some people that you're going to rely on. You need that. There you go. Mm-hmm. Are you going to be betrayed by people? Yes. Are you going to rely on people you shouldn't? Yes. Are you going to not trust people you should have? Yes. But we're not reasonable. It's through all those shortcuts like that that sort of reasoning emerges or is imitated. Okay. So that brings us to the Warsaw illusions. So Warsaw illusions, that's a big part of it theory, sort of putting, oh, by the way, Newton called it theory, just learned this recently, bundle theory, saying that there's not an individual self, it's a bundle of different things interacting, different motivations, and so on. That was well before we had the understanding we do now of neural architecture. Okay, so the Warsaw illusions. we have free will. It starts with W because it's kind of an acronym for something like Warsaw. If we define free will as first cause initiation of a behavior, okay, true free will would be regardless of what the conditions are, regardless of what might have activated what, right now I'm going to activate the behavioral protocol for this without any preceding cause. We're all part of the universe and the interaction of the universe. No reason to think yet that we are special where we can initiate some first cause thing where we're not just still reacting to the Big Bang or whatever. Okay. Integration, and this is a really important one. In order to have a sense of self, it has to be unified, right? You can't feel like you're a whole bunch of different pieces. So part of the illusion is that we think that every piece of us is influencing appropriately every other piece of us. So what that means is if you know something, then all of your behavior should be in line with that knowledge. If you want something, then all of your behavior and all of your perception, everything is in line with that. This is a myth, integration. You do not have, something can be happening in the brain without affecting every single other thing in the brain, without being consulted by every single other process in the mind. Which is how you can value reason, be against bias or something, and not at all behave that way. That can be a sentence that exists in one part of your mind without actually being one of the causes of your behavior that's produced elsewhere. Reason is the next one. Now, there are a few different ways to define reason. Sometimes I like to define it as the correct treatment of information. So we saw in an argument, you have your premises, and they lead to a conclusion. Now, you have to correctly interpret that, the weight of each premise, sort of. So if this is true, and this is also true, and they have some sort of opposing relationship, well, it matters how much to weigh each piece. What is the net sort of value of something? Maybe let's say you're looking at a moral question. There's this much value with this option, and there's this much value with this option. I need to be able to compare them, so I need to be able to attribute weights to them, right? So in any kind of reasoning or processing or calculations, you need to know which operations to do and the weight of each incoming piece of information. Not possible to be pre-programmed with that. Given if there's going to be new information, if you're in an open system. You just like a computer or an AI, it has to learn, right? You can't pre-program how to perfectly interpret every future piece of information. Same thing for the humans. We have to learn. So, just sort of by definition, not possible that we're pre-programmed with every sort of weight, or that we're perfectly calibrated for every piece of information that's going to come in. Also, we know from the slowness of biological evolution that we're lucky if we have some really reliable calibrations. And we do. When we see fire, we go the other way. We weight fire as being a threat that is worth moving away, even if we're in the middle of doing something, right? So we have, of course, lots of things pre-calibrated, but what we got on top of that is the illusion that every time we process something, that we're doing it with the perfect weights distributed, which just doesn't make any sense how that could have evolved. Now, Steven Pinker would define rationality as the use of knowledge to attain a goal. That's also, of course, part of reason, the objective. That always matters. So he would say the use of knowledge. I would just want to throw in there the correct use of knowledge or the best available use of knowledge or something like that. Because the correct use of knowledge is impossible, and we need to distinguish between that and just having pretty good treatment mechanisms. Okay, so these are the last, well, there's one more, naive realism. A term that I don't think David McRaney came up with, I'm not sure. Okay. So we're talking here about the illusions that are sort of implications of just a very basic understanding of the nature of reality, that it's material, that things interact, that there's such a thing as cause and effect, and then that's pretty much everything. That's what this, so the implications of that for the mind are, despite the free will we feel, the sense of integration we have, the sense of integration we have, the reliance on our mechanisms that we feel, and then also single observer. We think that our point of view is consistent, is singular and fixed. Now, maybe we can admit it's not fixed through time sometimes. But we still don't realize through time how much it's changing. Because if we go back to the brain, if you hear something, it's going to be processed there in Wernicke's area, for instance. And then it's going to go. It's going to go, for instance, to the thalamus is going to send it to the inferior colliculus. It's going to go here, and there are going to be these streams, right? But it's never the exact same stream. So necessarily, there isn't a single observer. It's always a different process. And what is observation but the reaction to a process? So every time there's a process, it is activating a different process. So this also an illusion, this singular reactor, responder, observer, or whatever, singular awareness. Same thing for the single operator, also an illusion. We like to imagine there's a little guy in there pulling the controls, and he's the one seeing everything that comes in, and he's the one pulling all the levers for everything that goes out. Just not the case. That man has not been found. It is distributed across the entire system. So you could trace a behavior and then another behavior like this. So the source isn't the same, and you can't even say that there's a central thing that always sort of processes it. The self is distributed. Okay, so this is major. These are some really, and then naive realism is the assumption that you see the world as it is. Which just doesn't make any sense, because the world exists out here, and what you've got are synaptic representations of it in there. Okay? I had, before I learned about naive realism, the sensor myth, which I think is kind of the same thing. But basically, the idea that you sense the world as it is, but this is one of the implications of this is, you just know. People really believe in that. You can tell. You see something, you just know. Or, I think this is what was happening in our brain, I could tell, or whatever. We think that we have this perfect sensor of things. We do not. Okay, now, the reason that we have all of these things is our conversation I very much enjoy. But first of all of this stuff has to be accepted, and stuff that that maybe Kevin Mitchell will talk about. Okay. I think the final thing, so we have a lot of vocabulary, but we're not going to talk about it today. But you just got things like if you want to say, I agree with that, who are you to say you agree with that? You don't know. Those are just words coming out. What is that based on? It's based on the activity of these its. They didn't create a sense of that's wrong. Or they created a sense of that's right. Those senses are not very reliable. You don't even know enough about because we're not integrated. When you're in a conversation, you hear something and you say, I agree with that. There's no way you could have checked all the different sort of beliefs in here. I could have called you at a different time of day and you could have agreed with that, and you wouldn't have agreed with that. You could have, whatever. You could have been feeling certain, whatever. So we want to avoid, so in the English language, all of those illusions are built in. The fact that we are reasonable, that's why we say, and then I snapped out of it, I came back to reality, stuff like that. So, so that's all built in. So we need new vocabulary because all of that's built in, okay? So for instance, rather than I agree, we say that sings. Can't tell you whether it's true or false. Can't even tell you whether it's consistent or not with what I think, but I do feel like it is consistent with what I think. That sings. The opposite being that shouts. And then if you're talking about behavior, so liver is the root word for any it that activates. Okay? So you've got the in livery, for instance, is the input to the whole system, what you hear. You've got the antilivery, which is sort of the activity that preceded a specific it, but within the system, right? So this memory, for instance, that happened and then triggered this, that would be the antilivery. You've got the eclivery. So this is the afferent information, this is the efferent information. And then you've got the exlivery, which is the behavior. Okay, so using that root, and those are some examples of that root, we can talk more accurately about the system as being distributed, about the self as being distributed. We can talk about, I had an instinct or an it that was livering. It even pre-livered, sort of, I experienced that I was going to do this. And then at the last second, another it sur-livered. So rather than saying, I wanted to do this, and then I changed my mind and decided to do this, which is not necessarily what happened. There wasn't necessarily an evaluation process and change of mind. It may have just been that this impulse just came in hot and sur-livered it. Okay? So there's, about 100 associated words. Talk about mallet, bonnet, and all that stuff. Okay, I think the last thing to have covered the basics that come to mind of this, bundle theory of this, and this is a just bundle of some important concepts that I see humans believe in that just aren't true, and then we also have the things that are true. So, condial concepts. So one, for instance, is dominodal processing. Okay. So if we go back to this, okay, imagine that as dominoes, right? Activity of one hitting the next, and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Well, there are also, of course, nodes, okay, where you've got a module that was working on something, and then ultimately just had to say something like whether we like the person or we don't. None of the evaluation needs to be passed on to the next step. There's no transcript of the discussion. It's passed on next step. Here's what triggered us. Here's what we liked, and so on. So at the next node, there's just sort of a yes or no. Okay? And what we learned from this, well, this is sort of a replacement to some of those Warsaw illusions. Rather than reason or free will, we just imagine dominoes. And then integration, obviously not all of the domino lines are connected. And then and then information loss at the nodes. Because there's information loss at the nodes. It's not like that the brain knows something but then hides it. The brain is not sort of a singular thing. I mean, it is, but it's a set of things. So more importantly, it'll just be that the information just didn't make it over to the next module. Okay, so with all of that said, that goes to the second reason that this is called it theory, not just because of if then, but also because of the important de-anthropomorphization of our components, right? We are a mind, a human, okay? It's not what we think, but our components are not little minds, right? They're just these little automatic mechanisms. They're these neurons, or if you're talking about the mind, then you can use language to refer to what we imagine the processing is. Okay. So all of that information is really obvious. It's obvious. It's the evidence is sort of pretty clear. It's just that those Warsaw illusions really get in the way of our being able to see that. It's easier when we step back. We imagine that we're observing these great primates, and then we can imagine, without that feeling stuff, we can imagine, wow, it's just neurons and neural connections. So the implications of all of this, besides just the theoretical, the Warsaw illusions and all that, once people let go of things like the Warsaw illusions, that they are reasonable, that they're integrated, well, I mean, I can't think of something that doesn't change. First of all, any belief that you have to take it less seriously. You will feel compelled to take it less seriously when you truly believe that this is what's happening and that you're processing. We haven't spent thousands of generations considering political systems. And if we're being honest, that's what an organism would need in order to have sort of reliable structures, especially given the strength of the more primitive structures, right? Things like in-group, out-group are going to greatly influence our political views, right? You need lots of generations for the networks that are supposed to be reasonable to be powerful enough to ex-liber, to be the output. Okay? Now, it may be possible without biological evolution, with cultural evolution, but that starts with first knowing that we are this. Because otherwise, so long as we think that we're a soul who can just decide things, and so long as we trust our experiences and our interpretations, obviously we can't make any progress. So that's the fundamentals, and all I brought to the table is organized what the evidence has been saying. It's not, in fact, no singular thing here is a unique insight. Lots of things are things that I saw well before I heard anybody else had seen them. But no singular thing here is a unique insight to me. What is unique is putting it all together and giving us a language to talk about it, and looking at the implications of it. Because we're kind of stuck on, holy shit, are we brains? And we've been stuck on that for the last like half century. And so I was just young enough to be able to, okay, let's just accept that. So what does that mean? Now, here's what here are two future projects. Alaris, which I talked about, which is evaluation of argument or disagreement. But given critical recognition, that is having an understanding of the mind, it theory can give you one with all those concepts there. Critical recognition is knowing I am an automatic evolved processor. And part of my evolved processing is a sense of knowing, is filling in gaps, is confabulation, right? Where you invent a story in order to have a narrative that works in the mind. That's how it works. And no system here, because we're not integrated, no system can identify when shit's being made up, when we're feeling confident, when we shouldn't be, etc. And that's a major blow. That should be a major blow to confidence and give us, of course, humility, skepticism of self. Okay. So once you have critical recognition, then the Alaris techniques will be usable. Once a person has critical recognition, and that's the next step. So right now, I have gotten all the stuff that we figured out about the mind, put it together in an easy to understand way. I mean, with the it's I kind of rushed through this, but anyway, and now it's all about application. So it's about figuring out an Alaris. And the only reason it took so long is because I was believing people when they were talking to me about their thoughts and when they were telling me about their own thoughts and minds and stuff. I was believing them. Now I know how the mind actually works. I can put it in a system that sort of compensates for maybe some of our illusions, but you shouldn't have those illusions if you have critical recognition. I don't know. Okay, now here's what I am excited about. Map it. Okay, so that's a symbol for it, right? Which is obvious, an I and a T, right? So you just have that little symbol there. So a method, it's a way to, because in philosophy, when we've looked at logic and argumentation, we've assumed that we are these souls, and so we assume that we are rational, and we take information, and whatever it does to us is correct, and then we write it out. And so we don't look at the mind part of it. We look at how you go from information to conclusion. Okay. But what would be really cool is how you could go from information, we'll call that bet, to a conclusion psychologically. So, for instance, let's say you're evaluating a candidate for work. Now, you're going to tell me, oh, yeah, I saw that he had succeeded at this job, but I saw that he wasn't very good at this. And so I didn't want to hire him. Okay, that may be one piece of it. But here's what I'm going to look at. Okay, he was black. He talked loudly. I don't know. Maybe we'll come up with other information as we go along. Now, in the sit stem, the fact that he's black, this is part of the in livery. Well, that we're going to get it outgroup, right? The outgroup it, right? That's going to be activated, right? Now let's look at his 4.0 GPA in high school, and let's look at his. I don't know whether you even do 3.6 in college. Watch how these things interact. So this comes in. It's evaluating it. It's not rational. Look at what it's taking in. Obviously, we are wired for the outgroup it. Once we've identified someone as the outgroup, for that to be considered in our evaluation. So we know that in the sit stem, this is linked, right? That's what that is, the outgroup bias. We see how evaluations change based on outgroup membership, right? I'm assuming that this, since we're not just absolute morons, I'm assuming that this is going to factor in as well. I know that both of these things are going to factor in. That's just how it works. The dominoes just fall. Okay? And then I don't know, something. So what we could do is we could do a method. Let's say rejection was the output. Okay, you're going to tell me, oh, I looked at his 4.0, but then I also looked at his 3.6. Those things were evaluated in rejection. But actually, if we had changed this, that had been in group, dominoes wouldn't have fallen that way. They would have fallen to the left. And you would have gotten approval, for instance. So what we can do is we can look at decision making, knowing not just the bonnets, the information processors that are that are reliable enough, but also looking at the mallets, because we have critical recognition. We know that we are not reasonable, so we know that this is a network. So that's what the method includes. It goes from premises to conclusion. It goes from a system of premises and conclusion where we didn't realize all this stuff that was happening. We thought it was all about information, judgment, but it's opening the black box and it's looking at the things we evolved to do that are going to be a part of that process and that might not be super reliable actually. Of course, last thing I'll say is that, so there's no, you see there's no guy in here to pull a lever. So there's no deciding, hey, I'm going to run bonnets on this one, okay? There's only two ways to adjust the processing system or to adjust the result. One, of course, you can change the conditions, the input, okay? You can slap, is what we say, different its. that are better geared to this and have a better result, maybe. So to refit something means to sort of reframe it. So for instance, if I'm giving you the CVs, I'm going to refit it. I'm going to give it to you like this so that this mallet here, the in-group, out-group, doesn't even run. Okay? And then the other thing is actually change the its. But there's no guy in here that can go, oh, blah, 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 or, oh, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So what is good is that the brain has an incredible capacity for learning. That requires practice, of course. But these neurons that we talked about, they undergo a process called Hebbian development, Hebbian learning. When these activate here, the connections are strengthened. When there has been inactivity for a while, they start to sort of be pruned, or at least to lose, connection. So through practice, through reward systems and stuff like that, you can re-habit, and habit because Hebbian or Donald Hebb, and then also a habit, right? So you can re-habit and then have it, right? So quite clever. You can re-habit the system. You can change the weights, right? So in some people's brain, for instance, for this outgroup mallet, it has different weights in different people's brains, right? We talked about the weights earlier and how it's calibrated. Some people, everybody has an in-group, out-group bias. Some people, this is going to be more weighted, and for some people, it's going to be less weighted. Okay, but that weight can, of course, change as we learn, not through a decision. The decision network isn't like a biological sort of manipulator itself. You can't say, okay, I'm going to decide to see this wavelength as red. I'm going to decide to feel this way. That's not how that works. But through practice behavior, through deciding to do a behavior, to expose yourself to certain conditions, to disallow certain X liveries, then through that, the networks will be adjusting. All right, last thing I'll say, just with that, for instance. So that's an example of an it theory therapy, which is basically just the same thing as use it or lose it, or so it's no heed, no need. So if you have, for instance, anxiety, you have some anxious its in a particular situation, and those anxious its make you want to ask, hey, were you talking about me or something? Or I don't know, or maybe those anxious its make you, I don't know. Anyway, do something that you don't want to do. For you, that anxious it is a mallet. It's not serving you well. Okay, so you need to figure out a way to not heed it. Again, it's not a first cause thing. You don't snap your fingers and say, this is no longer going to affect me. No. What you have to do is you have to maybe distract yourself or get someone else to distract you. Or you have to, you can handcuff yourself to make sure you're not able to heed the impulse, whatever. And then eventually that will be unhabited. The brain has already in it a principle, no heed, no need. That's it. Oh, well, let me give you another one. Refute to mute. I'm gonna rename this one, I think, because this can be generalized better. Because we are a system, and because we are not integrated, a piece of information can come into the mind and not have the full consequence that it should. Right? There can be other its that continue to act, to liver, even though in a reasonable system they wouldn't, given this recent introduction. Okay? Because we're not integrated, because there isn't a single observer, we know that we have to actually do a lot of refutation to mute. So we have to continuously expose ourselves to counter evidence on something in order for it to slap the appropriate its in the system, for it to really be integrated. This is typically, let's say you have an instinct, and let's say I used to have an instinct to go and, if I saw a beautiful woman, to go and talk to her. And it was partly about making sure that I had the courage. It was about getting the validation and so on. So what I had to do every time that impulse arose was concentrate my attention on the reasons that I don't actually want to do it. I had to sort of repeat it to myself, literally look it in the eye and refute it. Okay, you want to get up, but how likely is it that she's someone that you're actually going to be interested in? Think about that. Think about all those times that it wasn't someone you're interested in. Okay, that's number one. Number two, oh, this is kind of announced to pounce. And this is when you have identified in it, a it, we can say, so it's an it that is definitely, you're speculating that it's happening based on the output. You're like, oh, that must be in there producing this output. So you announce it in order to be able to engage with it, because a lot happens through language in the mind. A lot of the connections are semantic. So by literally saying it out loud, I have this impulse to do this. That information's going back into the auditory cortex and getting kind of announced to quite a few its that may not have been able to engage with it before you literally said it out loud. And so I say, no, you are doing that because you want the validation. And when I hear that, that triggers a sort of disgust with that. What? You're that kind of guy who needs validation? And then what does that do? That pulses. That's the opposite of slap. Slap is to trigger. That pulses the instinct to get up and do it, or that mutes it by refuting to mute it. So I just started. What I've finished is all the stuff that we've already figured out. I got it nice and in package. I've named things like malenting, for instance. I've named it so the concepts are clear and organized. Now it's about application through doing examples of a map it, looking at a conversation or looking at what somebody says, and based on my knowledge of those mallets that most people don't acknowledge, doing a map of activity that could have led to what the person said or decided or how they behaved.
Okay.
So, does that sound so crazy?
No.
Doesn't, does it?
No. Exactly, well, just over 50 minutes.
2024 Foxtrot O2 Golf, 1632. I said this. Consciousness is not needed to explain any mental event, any mental process, any behavior, any speech, any belief, any emotion, anything. No event except for this loose thing called our experience. And it's almost synonymous with our experience. So if we don't need consciousness to explain any mental process, then we don't need it when we talk about any mental process. Now we can add, when we talk about a mental process, I experienced that as a little tag-on. I was conscious of that. But, even then, how do you know? Because I can explain the mechanism by which those words came out of you. And I can imagine you having an image of that playing right now with that occipital lobe activity. So just say that then. So we basically create a need for consciousness, just like with God. You don't need God to explain any event in the world. So why are we talking about it when we talk about events in the world? Obviously, you're going to say, well, it's people who, whatever. But, yeah. And anyway, the good news is that I said that. I don't know whether he's still on the don't contradict anything I say thing, but he accepted that without saying, of course there's consciousness. What about this feeling of consciousness? What about decision making? Decision making is you can describe it as domino processing. Decisions happen, they aren't made. Choices happen, they aren't made. We are not angels or special. We are biological, physical entities. Obviously. Foxtrot 02 Golf 1634. I am having a little beer because we don't have any more non-alcoholic here. And I know that there is a belief in the soul. because of a few different things that were said. Like, I didn't mean to do that, my brain did. Oh yeah, how does decision making work? Maybe the brain presents choices to you. So consistent differentiating between a system that we've seen do things and a system that we've never even seen, period, but we experience to whom these choices are being presented. All right, so my dad's been slowing me down a great deal because he thinks I've been like having a several year long manic episode going down a rabbit hole, and I have no sense of science or critical thinking. So anytime I've ever even tried to explain it, theory shoots me at the gate. Says, of course, consciousness is real. Says, hey, you should look at other sources. Hey, you should blah, 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 blah. All right. We kind of came to some understandings on this trip. Anyway, so here's my... And then this moment happens. Now that we had come to some understandings, right, I knew I wasn't going to get sort of shot if I just brought it up. You've maybe seen the other videos. Anyway, so that's this. And there's something else I wanted to say. Shit, sorry, hold on. No, whatever. Foxtrot to Golf 1643, about 30 seconds later from the previous video. Shit. Slow me down. And then I realized in this presentation, literally all it theory is what we already know. Just packaged. Which I've said a number of times, especially to him recently. And it's just like, whoa. Actually, because I mean, I don't know whether he was just playing along or what, but it seemed like there was nothing to disagree with. It's all just basic fact. Just with nice names. And it's like, damn, bro. You had me thinking I must have been onto some freaky, crazy high-level shit because you're all like, oh, Eris, you have this theory, you gotta look at other opinions, and you're like, oh no, but it's wrong because of this, even though you didn't know what it was. So I was thinking, oh man, this must be high level then. I mean, part of me must have been thinking, because then as I was giving the presentation, I was like, this is what we already know. And that has been a source of my frustration. It's like, why are you shooting me out of the gate when I'm just trying to give you the names of what we already know? Now, it does conflict with what he knows, but it is very much in line with other things he knows. Because, as we know, we're not integrated. So he was, at the same time, able to be a scientific materialist. Very much atoms are the fabric, blah, blah. But then also, and also anti-religion and all that, but also definitely believed he was a thing separate from his brain. But then when he actually let me go through, oh no, I'm spoiling it. Foxtrot to Golf 1646. Anyway, the point is, I don't know when you're seeing this right now, but the point is that I'm very excited about the work that's coming, because I think that the work that's coming is actually new stuff. Now that I've gotten a pretty complete package of the latest of our understanding, if we don't include anything quantum, and we just assume a Newtonian biological world, then I've got that. Now, it's the application phase. We kind of felt like we started the application phase about 2 months ago or so. And that is, but now that if Dad can validate the foundations, I think that's enough for this system to, all right, let's apply this stuff properly with vigor and passion.
Forgive me, buddy.
No,
just
don't.
with your face. It's just your face. Forgive me, buddy, for the sudden... All right, just tell me this. Am I having a manic episode going down a rabbit hole?
No.
Should we have a moment and cry together?